Hey folks, we've been doing a lot of soft skills-ish type episodes on the show lately. Did one about being a solo sysadmin, how to run IT with no budgets. We've even talked about, getting into the industry via university in the past or certifications. What I thought would be interesting today would be to kind of do that same spin, but from a historical, real-world perspective here. And today I've got Eric Siron on, and we're going to be talking about how we got into tech. How did we get into IT? What were our first IT jobs? What do we wish went differently? How would we have done things differently? What were the mentors we had along the way? What were the big learning situations we had along the way? So we got that and lots more on today's episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Hey everyone, welcome to SysAdmin Weekly, the podcast by sysadmins for sysadmins and dedicated to all the tireless tech folks working out there in the trenches day in and day out to keep the digital world spinning. This is episode 56, recorded on August 10th, 2026. As always, I'm your host, Andy Syrewicze, and I've got my partner in crime. I've got Eric Siron with me. How's it going, Eric?
Hey, I'm all right. How you doing, Andy?
Doing good. It's been a week or two since we recorded an episode, so the tech news cycle has been quite busy in the last 2 weeks here. So good having you as always, my friend. I'm excited to talk about our main topic today. And of course, that main topic today is, I guess you could call this a bit of a soft skills episode, maybe a IT career-oriented type episode. And of course, today, Eric and I are going to be talking about how we got started in the IT industry. How did we become sysadmins? What's the path that we took to basically end up where we are in the industry today? And I'm sure as we kind of go through today's content, we'll talk about things like, stories that changed the way that we approach IT, talk about maybe some things that we might have done a little bit differently if we were to do it all over again, and a couple of other insightful things and hopefully some helpful information for folks at various stages in their careers in the sysadmin trenches. So should be a good show for our listeners today. But before we get to that, I've got my show plugs and just some general information to get to here with you guys. So first off, if you're new to the show, welcome. Really hope you enjoy your time here. If you want to find all the links associated with the show, you can go out to www.sysadminweekly.com and you'll find links to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You'll find a link to our newsletter, which you can find at newsletter.sysadminweekly.com. That is a newsletter that gets published weekly as well, and that includes some opinion sections. It includes some useful links that could be useful in the sysadmin trenches for you, and lots of other great content. So again, be sure to check that out at newsletter.sysadminweekly.com. And a couple other things I want to mention here. Our intros tend to be a little bit on the longer side when compared to other podcasts, but I think they're fun. We talk about current happenings in the IT industry. We talk about the nerdy, geeky stuff that we've been working on in our spare time, and generally have fun talking and nerding out about tech. Now, that said, if you want to jump straight to the core topic of today's episode, you can use the chapters section on whatever platform you're using, or you can skip to roughly the 20-ish minute mark, and that should get you pretty close to the main topic. The other thing I want to mention really quick before we get to our usual sections is you've probably noticed we had a short break in between episodes 54 and 55. That was unintended. I've had a ton of work travel for over the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks now, something like this, and I found myself in a place where. This one was a vacation travel, this particular week. The week I was on vacation, I found myself in a place where, surprisingly, 5G did not work as well as I was expecting, and I was having troubles getting things uploaded. And then I was in Vegas for the Black Hat Conference, and that required way more of my time than I was anticipating. All suffice to say that we are rebuilding our buffer up, so this stops happening, and we should have a steady stream of content for you all moving forward. So again, apologies about that. Thank you for the understanding. And with that, we'll jump right into our usual content here. So I'm going to start with our news react segment here, Eric, and I guess I will jump right in with my particular item. And it was something that caught my eye today, again, August 10th. And now this particular article was written today on August 10th. And this is out on venturebeat.com. And the headline is Meta returns to open source with Muse, Glimmer, and Apache 2.0 licensed 30 billion parameter AI model optimized for agents available now. Now, I want to preface this by saying it is my opinion that Meta is a garbage company and has done immeasurable harm to our social fabric. Now, that said, I think this is a very good move overall for the industry. I've spent some time talking in previous episodes about how um, there's been a lot of question about open source models and whether they would start being monitored and controlled by government entities. And we saw some of the large frontier model companies in the industry gives some indications that they're not happy that there's open source models. Again, see a couple of the previous episodes here where we talk about that at length. Now, since there's been an about face in the industry, had a letter, an open letter, get published by a lot of the big tech companies in the space, reaffirming their belief that open source is super important when it comes to the AI ecosystem. And then I look at all of that in context with this announcement from Meta, and I think it's good news for the industry as a whole. I've always been a big advocate for open source. Now, yes, I get and I understand that Meta is doing this for their own reasons. If I saw some commentary earlier today in a Reddit thread, and people were basically talking about how, like, okay, Meta has kind of fallen behind the open AIs and the Anthropics of the world. And when you're not able to compete at that level, what do? You change your game a little bit, right? So I know there's business reasons why they're making this choice, but open source anything I think is good for the industry. So I think this is going to change the way that Anthropic and OpenAI approach some things. So overall, I think it'll be a good thing for the industry. So I'll put a link to this VentureBeat article in the show notes so you can check it out. But that's kind of what caught my eye. What do you got, Eric? What's caught your eye recently?
I'm gonna go to basically an aggregated story that's not exactly new, but so sure we've all heard by now about the data centers going up all around the United States and who knows
Yep.
where else. How the locals hate them. Nothing new. Did see that in the aggregators that the states are starting to get a little bit more involved with this and kind of listening to their constituents enough to kind of start to step in. And part of the reason I want to bring this up is this actually has now become personal for me, as we don't have an AI data center coming, but we do have a business that's coming in and they want to do like a power farm. So the plan that they have is to bring in a whole bunch of gigantic lithium phosphorus batteries and buy power from the power grid to charge them. And then when the power grid is low, then they sell that power back to the power grid, which sounds great. But then, the more you start looking at, first of all, lithium is extremely reactive to water.
Right.
It's just,
Right.
it's explosively reactive.
Yeah.
And so it probably would take a little while to go through, but a lot of environmental concerns. And if you don't even care about the environment, they're still like, if it goes, can your local fire departments deal with that? Because that you can't just spray water on a lithium fire unless you just
Right.
want it to get
Yeah.
bigger. So all these different concerns, and then, but what I'm kind of getting at is the way this company did it is they hit the letter of the law by absolutely avoiding the intent of the law. So they're like, well, we sent out letters to all the potentially impacted people, telling them it was coming. Well, but everybody within a potential blast radius of this, we didn't get letters. who got letters? Well, the people who were directly adjacent to the property got letters. Okay, but if you have this fire, you're going to be throwing, you're going to have the lithium problem first, and of course, phosphorus going up into the air, into the airstream, which goes right over my house and a bunch of other people's, and like you're talking that happens. That's an evacuation of. I mean, it's just like but by the letter of the law, they did send the letter to the affected people, and they
Yeah.
kind of came into the zoning commission, and they're just kind of like snowballing these people who don't have a clue. Your zoning commission people, they're about, well, we industrial and commercial and residential, and here's why and whatever. And so they don't really know what any of these words are, and they're being sold one bill of goods, and that particular zoning board just doesn't have the resources to really research this.
Right.
So they're getting absolutely steamrolled, and like this is how it works. This is how this kind of stuff is done. Is they come in and they're doing the legal thing, right? But they're not at all. There's you can say, all right, well, yeah, you hit the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law is that you don't bring stuff into a region that's going to be dangerous, and you give people the opportunity to know about it and to respond to it and have and they really sidestepped all that in a really kind of an awful way, and it's
Not being
just
transparent.
no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, no. And then the more you get into it, it's like, okay, so the person who owns the land is going to lease it. This company's not going to buy it, so they lose that. They don't have that liability anymore. The person who owns it doesn't live in the state, so he doesn't care. If it melts down, so what? Not his problem, right? He gets his money back out of them. The company itself is an LLC. We don't really know how the ownership works, but limited liability is what that means. So there's only so much we could, like if they make this whole area uninhabitable, there's really no recourse for the affected people, which would include me. The company itself isn't from here, so if they get bad publicity in this area, doesn't
Doesn't matter.
impact their business any. Doesn't even like the power company hasn't shown up to any of these things. So it sounds like this company's planning to buy from my power company, but not necessarily sell the overflow power back to my company. So it's like they don't really have a vested interest in it because it's just another customer as far as they're concerned. They're not
Right.
getting
Yeah.
into the buying cycle of it. So there's all these shady things going on to keep it out of the public consciousness. And like, oh, okay, so this is how these data centers are going up everywhere too. That's exactly the same kind of nonsense as they're pulling.
Yeah.
So having the states at least start to catch up on what's going on. And so with the state swoops in on some of these local things, like we don't, a lot of us have a big home rule mentality. We don't really want the state interfering in the locals, and I'm not going to argue with that mentality. I get it, but at this point, like our zoning commission doesn't have the resources necessary to
Yeah.
really understand what they're being sold here, where the state
Yeah.
does. So, uh, when you're reading a lot of these stories and these things that are happening, at least we're finally starting to get that public consciousness going on and taking a closer look at a lot of these things. So I'm not going to promise anything anywhere is going to change. I don't know if I'm going to not need to try to sell my house soon to get out of here before this lithium battery place blows up. I don't know what's going to happen, but what I'm hoping is we're starting to get enough pushback that this is not just going to everybody, all these companies are going to steamroll these local areas the way they have been.
That's that's the big thing for me is you see that happen time and time again where local areas just get steamrolled by the big mega corporation. Um, I don't remember the exact case, but there was a case. Again, I don't remember exactly which company or where, but I remember reading about a case where the local municipality basically said, "Yeah, no, Mr. and Mrs. Data Center, you're not gonna build here, right?" And then the data center company ended up suing the local municipality, and the municipality basically said, okay, you know what? Yeah, you can build here because they the town was not going to be able to afford the defense needed to fight back against said mega corporation. So,
Right. So
and
we may be
it's
looking at the beginning of a fight. Who knows? But
um,
it's worth having as every chance we get everywhere in the country is So ours would be the fear if something goes wrong, and then one I was watching of there's people literally across the street from a data center that's running like 160 decibels or some insane number, and like we can't shut our windows or put in enough stuff to drown the sound out. It's constant. It never goes
Yeah,
away and
yeah.
stuff like that, you know? I mean, it's coming to a place near you. I
It's yeah, I mean, it's tough to watch. I I yeah. I like you said, I think most people are would rather states stay out of local business where at all possible, but like you said, this is a case where only the state's going to have that amount of pull to fight back against those situations. So that'll be one to keep an eye on and watch. So hopefully hopefully it doesn't get too dragged out in your area on that lithium. I don't know if I want to say factory or farm. It's not a lithium farm, but power bank, giant power bank. We'll call it that. So anyway, yeah, I hear giant lithium batteries, and instantly I'm thinking of catastrophic fire. So
Mhm. And,
uh,
I'm not that far from the Mississippi River. We're upstream of a lot of stuff. You start dumping a bunch of phosphorus in from the air into the water, and it's gonna go downstream, and it's just I don't know that you could even put it it's just wild how dangerous this is gonna be.
no joke, and I'm
And with
course.
no local municipality, like, even if we called a couple over, we still couldn't get people in to, like, extinguish the fire. It would basically just burn until it didn't have any fuel left, and
Yeah. Uh, well, keep us updated on that one. Yeah, selfishly, I'm kind of curious to see how that one pans out, but you have to let us know. So, anyway, time for our next recurring segment on the show. This is our Nerd Hour segment. This is the segment of the show where my co host and I talk about the geeky, nerdy things that we've been doing either in our professional time or our personal time. And I guess, again, I'll go first with this one as well. I've been doing a lot of travel, so I've not had a ton of time for lab stuff. So my my nerd hour segment is all about something that I added to one of my regular demos. So I mentioned I was at the Black Hat conference last week, as of the time of this recording, and I did have a session there where I talked about. I mentioned this on the show a couple of episodes ago, where I had done a session at InfoSecurity EU, about how threat actors get up to mischief with local LLMs running on their local hardware. Now I did a variation of that demo at Black Hat, but I'm walking into Black Hat. I'm thinking about the audience that's going to be there, and I'm like, okay, Black Hat. We're going to have some very very techie folks here. So I want to make my local LLM spear phishing generation demo a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more technical, right? And the session was a little bit different in that we weren't talking about spear phishing in general, but spear phishing and threats targeting Microsoft 365 specifically. So, in addition to my normal demo that I did, just showing spear phishing generation using models like Quen 2.5 and Dolphin Llama 3, I took it to the next step, and using my targets list, I um, basically I created a second script that, using the same methodology, output spear phishing messages that were specific to the person, but also had a M365 angle as well. For example, oh hey, so and so shared a file with you in SharePoint. Click here to reach it. Or your 365 license is going to expire unless you click on this link here. And the other thing I did is I took the raw output and pushed it through an HTML parser and created a rough HTML output that could get injected into an email as well too. And that session was recorded. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can include that in the show notes. That way you guys can take a look at it. But if that is published by Black Hat by the time this episode goes live, I'll be sure to include it in the show notes. Otherwise, I'll keep an eye out for it, and I'll put it in the show notes of whatever episode is current at the time. So that's been my Nerd Hour segment with all of the travel I've been doing. What about you, Eric? What do you got?
oh, thinner than yours even. I, had that ongoing saga with trying to get some, Ethernet cable running through my walls, and I had
Yeah,
a
yeah,
what I
yeah.
thought was gonna be this great solution. Oh,
Oh, no. Didn't go
so
so well?
I'm it did not. What? Because when we bought the house, it has I don't know if I said it on air before, but it has a whole home vacuum system. And the vacuum unit on it was sold at auction before we got here, so it's just the piping that is running through,
Interesting.
and so I'm like, "You know what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get some fish tape because fish tape is really meant for going through conduit, not so much through
Yep,
walls." So, like,
yep.
I'm gonna get some fish tape, and then I'll just I can get down here. We have a drop ceiling in the basement, and I have to go up like a s it's not exactly 2 levels, but we'll just say 2 levels for the sake of ease, right? And then so I'll just fish it through that, but I'll come down here. We have drop ceiling in the basement where I am and where all my network drop needs to get to. So, like, I'll kind of see where all the stuff goes, and then I'll use the fish tape and run it through that. It'll work like conduit. It's gonna be amazing. And all I can figure, and I don't know, but it seems like that very top level. It's like from in the basement side. It seems like the vacuum tunnel goes outside, like through
That's
the
weird.
insulation and everything, and then up. And so, which would be like, I don't know.
That is
I don't
an
know. I
odd.
don't know. I don't understand because at that point I couldn't follow it anymore, and just then I go upstairs and try to work from that direction down, and I can't see anything from there, and just
'Cause
I
everything's in
need
the
I'm gonna have
wall
to make
and
a.
crawl spaces, and you
I
can't
don't even
get
have
to this.
crawl space. I don't know where
Yeah,
the stuff goes. It would be like pulling walls apart to then get in there, like tearing down drywall to look, or unless I had one of those. They have cameras for this,
yeah,
right? But I don't have. I was just.
and I mean, nobody wants to start making holes in the drywall unless you really have to,
You
right?
have.
So
Well, we also, I think, if you're going to do that, you need a plan at that point. And I don't have a plan because it seems like this is going to be this major. And I don't. If it literally goes out past the insulation, I don't want my Ethernet cable out in the elements like that.
yeah, I mean,
I
yeah,
don't
you could.
know that the variance of temperature is high enough, but it can get to, effective 110 plus and negative
Yeah,
60 effective temperatures, and it'll be in a conduit, so not that. But no, I just don't want that.
yeah.
It, especially because like you're looking at the footage of it to go. Of course, I don't know what's happening upstairs, but that's in the middle of the house. It's almost like directly above where I'm at in the basement, but offset. So that runs all the way to the front of the house and then does something and then runs all the way back up on this other level.
So now you're wondering about maximum length of the run.
Yeah. What else
Mm,
is going on? And is it going by other things? And
yeah,
like, no, if I'm going to get into this, then I'll just come back with the old basic plot of, well, I need to just drill straight down through the
yeah,
footer of the studs and all that good stuff, like, you would normally do, but I don't know where it's just the whole thing. So, like, just I'm gonna table that project until it cools down and I can get up into the attic and kinda see where
yeah,
find an alternative route. There's gotta be something better than all that nonsense, but
yeah. When we
so right
moved
now
into
I
this
get up there
house,
at 160 degrees at
oh,
least, you know what I mean?
yeah.
So I'm not going up in the mm-mm.
Yeah, when we moved into this house, I ran 2 cables, one along the length of my basement, and then one up into the attic and down into our we have an open floor plan upstairs,
Okay.
and, I mounted an access point on the ceiling in that open area, and after I ran those, I'm like, "Nope, no more, never again. This is the last time I'm doing this." So,
Well,
that
what
was
I'm
enough.
hoping to do is go because it seems like there's a nice convenient drop through down into the utility room. Like it seems like there's a spot in the walls. I'd have to be in the attic to access it at all, but it seems like from there there's quite a bit of space and everything. And
Mm,
I could
yeah,
if I can do that, then I can get down here where the drop ceiling is. And working in a drop ceiling is not exactly
lot
pleasant, but it's not hard.
yeah, it's a
It's
lot
one of the
easier.
boxes. Yeah. So if I can get conduit or something going, then it's not a just but that's
Yeah,
definitely not a midsummer project.
right, no
I
joke.
choose life. I choose life, and I've had some people like,
Pretty
you
much.
can pay somebody. I'm like, I'm gonna have somebody up in there. No, I don't care if he's, no, we're not doing that.
Be
So
like, be like Arrakis up there, there's my Dune reference for for now, so
Yeah,
it'd be like
it would be like that. It would be like that.
you have to wear a still suit to
Oh,
go up
well,
there.
but also the 7,000% humidity that we're dealing with right now too,
Oh,
so not
okay, well, yeah,
yeah.
that doesn't apply then. So, anyway. So, with that, that wraps up our regular recurring segments, and it's time for our main segment. So, again, we today are talking about, how do people actually get into sysadmin work? And I figured this would be a great time for us to kind of discuss this topic through the lens of Eric and I's own careers. And where I wanted to start with is not necessarily at the start of our careers, but before that, what led to us getting into IT, to pursuing a career in IT? And yeah, in my notes, I wrote this down as the stuff we broke before anyone paid us. Right? And so, uh, what kind of led me down this rabbit hole is I made an appearance on my employer's behalf on the Joey Pins podcast. And Joey went down a talk track where asked a couple of introductory questions about myself. One of them was like, okay, like, how'd you get into technology? And that's what led me into today's topic is like, it could be useful information for folks that are either just getting into the industry or people are curious what our career trajectories looked like. That way they could compare them with their own and maybe provide some useful career information for those folks in the trenches. So that's why I kind of wanted to do today's episode. And so like I said, maybe let's start with, what led to us getting into tech and again, starting with the stuff that we broke before anybody paid us, right? And so I can speak for myself, kind of where I got started in tech. I remember as a kid just always being interested in how things worked. Anything technology related. I remember getting my very first Nintendo when I was, I don't know, I was pretty young. I was single digit age, but I remember thinking like, boy, this thing is really cool. It plugs into the TV. I put this cartridge block thing in. I press the button and stuff appears on the TV. That's amazing. How does that work? And now all these years later, I understand how the Nintendo works, right? But that was the very earliest thing I remember having that thought process with technology. I also remember when my stepdad walked into the house carrying our very first computer, and it was a 486 with a raging fast 25 megahertz processor in it. But I remember, Windows 3.1 on that thing. I remember having to drop out to DOS to run games like Space Quest 2 and Coaster. And, that whole thought process led me to another core fact of what ultimately led me into technology, even through my formative years in high school, right? In that oftentimes I was learning things with computers via proxy of trying to get games working, right? Or, trying to get mods installed or trying to do something with games. The other situation I can think of that speaks to my need to understand how things worked and just my general want to tinker with technology and computers in general was you remember in Windows 98, Eric, you could define a custom boot screen. So, that screen that you turn the computer on, starts loading Windows 98, you have the little bar going across the screen, and it had the Windows 98 logo there, right? You could change that boot screen with a custom image. And there were packages online at the time where you could install that package and it would adjust the theme of the OS as well as the boot and shutdown screens. Well, I was really into the Matrix at the time that it came out, and I'm like, hey, cool, there's this cool Matrix theme that we can put on the PC. And well, it put a picture of Neo and Trinity and Morpheus on the screen, and they're like holding guns, and I remember my stepmom was very bothered by the fact that when she turns on the computer, there are these people with guns on the screen. Andy, you need to change this back. You need to fix this. Right? And I remember taking the time, like, okay, where does this file live? This image file is getting loaded from somewhere. It was somewhere in Sys32. I don't remember exactly where, but I remember taking the time to figure out, like, okay, this image file lives here, and if I rename this, and this looks like the default one, figuring out how that worked. Again, just another example of me breaking stuff on computers as a kid and figuring it out. And it's that mentality, that tinkering and breaking things and fixing it that ultimately led me later on to, well, hey, I'm actually kind of good at this. And I got hired on as my first IT job. We'll get into this more later. My first IT job, I actually was a summer job for the high school that I actually attended. And so, again, very early before my first IT job, that's the type of stuff that I was doing. And I'm sure you probably have similar stories, Eric, but those are mine at least.
Well, so I'm a bit older than you.
Just a bit.
Yeah, I wanna be careful because I know a lot of times I get really exhausted with people who try to out old each other with the, "Well, I had this thing and I had that thing," and, they keep trying to who went the farthest back in time. So, computing was well established by the time I came along. I'm not that old. I did have a few ends as far as the way the world was working at that time. So, go back in history, in 1980, Compaq took an IBM PC and all the documentation they could get their hands on, and they sat down in a room and figured out, I put this in, this comes out the other side, and they kept doing that until they came up with a very good, reasonable facsimile of the IBM personal computer. And that was how the very first IBM compatible PC was born, which we all owe the fact that computing is more or less an open world to that
Right.
IBM copyrighted their material, but they did not patent it.
Right.
So once the compact device was in the world, it was too late, prior art, whatever. I don't know how it all works. I'm not a lawyer, but um, so I was not around for that. I mean, I was alive when it happened, but I was not doing anything with it. For the few years after, the computing was taking off. A lot of people can say, "Well, I had an Atari computer or a Tandy." They had a TRS-80, the Radio Shack one in my school. Um, at home, we had the daddy of the Commodore 64. It was the
Okay.
VIC-20, and you loaded stuff off of audio cassettes with that thing, right?
Right.
And all of that was wild to me that I put this audio tape in, and I was still pretty young, but I did have a sort of an understanding of how analog worked, right? So this whole thing was like, it's an analog thing on there, but it becomes digital. And so kind of like you were talking about, that curiosity of what the heck is going on here,
Right.
but also not yet, my brain wasn't yet formed to a place where I could actually really dive in and start tearing apart how stuff worked. But my dad came from dad was a legitimate baby boomer, and so I had a very large and diverse family. So a lot of real smart people in there. Like we had a rocket scientist, legitimate rocket scientist, so he would come
Wow.
in and influence, intelligence and tinkering, and we're putting people on the moon, which again, I'm not that old. I wasn't there for that either, but these are the kind of things that are going on in his world. And I had an
Right.
uncle who worked at Xerox, and once upon a time, Xerox was uh the basically the default definition for photocopier. When you said
Yeah.
photocopier or Xerox, that's what you meant.
Yep.
Well, around this era, Xerox was also one of the biggest computer manufacturers. I had an uncle who worked at Xerox. We got our hands on a 286 pretty
Ah,
early in that spectrum. I mean, not super early, but so I'd already been through a rash of non PC compatibles when the 286 came in,
right.
right? And then we got one in our house, right? And that was running what, DOS, 3? I don't think it was 2. Maybe it was 2 something. I'm not really sure. But ran DOS and just uh, how does this stuff work? And I grew up with that thing. I got into high school with that, and then after that, our stories kind of merge a little bit. For graduation, I got a 486 25 megahertz, and how do I overclock this to 33 megahertz? And I did it with a box fan, you guys. You
Turbo
go.
button. There's the turbo button. That
Well, it
was
had a
until
turbo button,
later.
but the turbo button was so I could play Centipede. Because if I didn't push the turbo button, then as soon as I booted the Centipede game, the Centipede was at the bottom of the screen, like as soon as you hit play. Poof. So I had to push the turbo button so the Centipede would make his normal,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
yeah, so but yeah, how do I overclock this? And it was you take the case off and put a box fan on it, a 15-inch box fan or 12-inch box fan like you buy from Walmart, and that's how I cooled it. Right? How does this
It
stuff work? How
works.
does this stuff work? Yeah,
Yep.
and that's really what that's a very long story, but I don't really remember a time very clearly when I didn't have tech around and I wasn't just wildly like excited by it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much the same with me too. I've always had techie stuff around, and I I remember the very first PC I built. The one that was mine from the ground up for the first time. It was a Pentium 3, and I inherited a hand-me-down case from a friend who didn't want it anymore. And you know the little jumper that connects to the power switch jumper on the on the main board, right? The little cable, and then it goes to the power switch. The case lacked that. So when I wanted to power on this machine, I had to manually connect the pins using a screwdriver to power on the case, right? But I knew how to do that because I had learned about it. I'm like, oh, okay, it's these two pins here that start the PC. They initiate that startup option, right? So again, that's me just wanting to tinker and understand how it works. And like, yeah, I could have taken the time to, go and procure the proper cable and all that, but I'm like, yeah, I never turned it off anyway, so I'll just power it on with a screwdriver. So anyway, so I think the overarching thing I'm hearing here is um tinkering. We both kind of had that want to tinker and learn how things work, and we had that curiosity. What's funny is that curiosity word. Paul and I did an episode of the show a while back. I mean, we're talking like in the 30s, maybe 20s, where we talked about the traits, the qualities that make a good sysadmin.
Pause for the audience. What he means is episode numbers, not the 1920s or the 1930s. Okay, continue.
Yes, you're correct. You're correct. But curiosity was one of those qualities that we talked about and identified in that episode. And I think out of a lot of the sysadmins I've talked to over the years, this seems to be one of the overarching, common qualities that most people in this industry have. I'd be curious, those of you listening, is that kind of the same for you? Is that how it started for you? Let us know in the comments. On YouTube, you can leave a comment. On Spotify, you can leave a comment, or you can just email us at contact@sysadminweekly.com as well, too. Or leave a note in the GitHub discussion forums as well, too. So anyway, so, we kind of established that the early days. But let's talk now about how we kind of got into that initial job in our IT careers. And again, like I said earlier, mine started as a summer job for the high school that I attended. And, I look at that and the part I don't necessarily remember, I remember getting the job and having the job. The part I don't remember is how I made that initial connection with the sysadmin at the high school at the time. I remember we used to go into his office, me and a couple of the other guys, and we'd just talk about tech, during lunch or after school, and we were, I was very fortunate in that he was very receptive to that. He loved to have students come in and just talk tech in his office. I mean, this is the guy, single sysadmin, right? Solo sysadmin, like we talked about a couple episodes ago. Just trying to keep this K through 12 school district up and running, but also taking the time to kind of act as a mentor to myself and two others. And like I said, it's that initial, I don't remember exactly how we got to be friends with the sysadmin at the school, but I was fortunate because that ultimately led to me and these two other guys ending up as, it was a summer job for us. And I remember we had two big jobs that summer. One was decommissioning all of these old Windows 95, Windows 3.1 machines across the entire district, scrapping the motherboards, the memory, making sure we pulled the hard drives out of them. And the other big one that we had, the other big job that we had, and it's funny because it kind of fits with your cabling story, Eric, is we had to run cabling for. I think I've told the story on the show before. We had to run cabling for a net new computer lab that was getting installed in the district. And I don't remember who measured the cables. I really hope it wasn't me. I don't remember it being me, but we got all the way to the DMARC with the cables after running through multiple firewalls, not digital fire, actual firewall breaks in the building after running through those and running through drop ceilings. And we get to the DMARC location where all the patch panels are, and we're about a foot short for 30 cables.
Oh, no.
So, to the sysadmin's credit, between the four of us, we essentially created 30 makeshift extenders with the female RJ45 end. We made extenders to extend that final 1 foot for the 30 cables. But you can imagine our surprise when, switches are patch panels are here,
Oh,
cables
no.
are there. And we just worked for 8 hours pulling all those cables.
Oh, oh.
Anyway, but yeah, that was my first IT job, and eventually that led me to getting hired on as a full-time technician after I graduated, and I worked there as my first full-time IT job for the first year, maybe two, and that's where I learned early Active Directory user management. That's where I cultivated my love of open source and Linux because he was a big Debian Linux guy. You hear me talk about Debian Linux on the show all the time. That's where it comes from for me. My very first IT mentor was a big Debian Linux guy, and we ran at the time Debian Sarge version 3 at multiple places throughout the district. Actually had a firewall. The district's firewall was a Debian Linux box running Squid and Dan's Guardian with IP tables as the firewall. And so anyway, and that's how I got in the door, essentially. That's how I started cultivating IT experience. From there, I moved on to a Fortune 500, Fortune 200 manufacturer, actually.
Nice.
And that's where I cut my teeth on true enterprise IT. Um, and I learned a lot of very good technical knowledge from that particular job. Further Active Directory administration. That's where I first started touching Exchange administration, and that's where I discovered my hate and disgust of Microsoft Exchange. Was that particular job? Because we were running Exchange 5.5, and if I ever see the information store service fall over flat on its face again, it will be too soon. Because Exchange 5.5 was notorious for that. Anyway, and that was really my early days in the sysadmin trenches. From there, I went to the MSP space. From the MSP world, I ultimately switched over to the vendor side, and the rest is history. We might get into more of that later on, but I really wanted to focus on the early years of how I entered the tech space. So that's me, Eric. I don't know, what your origin story is, your sysadmin origin story.
Oh, it's interesting. I almost wonder if there aren't multiple answers to that question. So my first actual nerd job, I was working on a freight dock. Just trailers bring in freight, and we'd pull it off of one trailer and shuffle it up and put it on other trailers, and that was my job.
Okay.
And I was good at it and fine. I liked it. I was still a young guy, and made decent enough money and whatnot. So I had my commercial driver license A,
Oh,
level A, there's ABC,
yep, yep.
licenses, so A and B are both commercial, so I had a CDL-A learner's permit, and I had been, practicing and driving around town a little bit with some of the other drivers, and I was, well, gonna be a truck driver, that's what I'm gonna do. And about the same time I was working through that, then something happened, and they're like, "Well, we could use somebody up in the office who can work the computers." So, well, if it gets me
Okay.
off the freight dock and people yelling at me all the time, sure, I'll try that out. What the heck? And um, so yeah, I kind of became the local internal IT guy a little bit, sort of. So they had a on premises, they had a RS6000, which is if you're familiar with the AS400 from IBM, that was kind of
Yep.
its predecessor. I'm not really sure how that all worked out,
Interesting.
but it was a risk system, and then there was a central risk bank or something, I don't know, in home office that would constantly communicate to all the RS6000s out in the field at all the different terminals. And then they would spit information out of their local printers, and so and then we had our own dumb terminals there that were wired back in our local RS6000. And so I did a lot of things there. Wound up getting sucked into billing, which is basically just a lot of typing. But
Right.
also I was doing a lot of I mean, this is some kind of early day stuff. A lot of the jobs that we have today were not well defined yet. So
Right. Right.
yeah. Um, and I got to a place where I was royally unhappy with the management structure and a lot of things that were going on at the time. So I started looking around, and uh, there was a job posting for technical support. So I went and I answered the ad, and I went in and they give you a questionnaire. And I thought, well, with all my home experience and everything else, and then the stuff at uh, that trucking company, that okay, well, when they hired me, they were like excited to have me, like I did well.
Yeah.
And a month in or so, I was walking past the front door, and somebody, they brought her in, and she was turning in her application with that form, the questionnaire on it, and person at the desk like, "What, you forgot to fill this in." She goes, "No, I didn't. I don't know any of the answers. I don't know nothing about all that. I just want a job." And they hired her. So doesn't seem like the bar to enter was all that high. I didn't last there very long, but that was then my origin story of doing phone-based tech support for computer companies that some of you have heard of and some of you have not, and so on and so forth. Don't really need to get into it, but
Right.
yeah, that was where I learned to dislike the public a lot. Sorry.
You want to dislike the public? Do frontline IT support on the phone.
Yeah, yeah. So from there, though, that job was enough to get me into my next job, where I really believe that I kind of would say that the path to sysadmin was started, because that was a fun job. I really like that. So let's say you get hired at a new company and they come in and like, all right, Andy, sit down here in front of our little camera and take your picture, and then we're gonna slap it onto this badge. It's
Yep.
got your uh, employee photo and then a logo with the company and whatever, and then on the back is a mag stripe or smart chip. Even, I mean, this was late '90s, but smart chips
Yep.
were around then too, and
Yep.
so I was like I handled the part of it that did imaging, because there's multiple systems that were involved in that, but the one that just straight up does like a card that would look like your driver's license or credit card, something like that. Those are systems I worked with, and that was a lot of fun. I solved some really cool problems at that job, and sometimes I was like, I kind of miss it a little bit, but yeah. Then after that, it was just winging my way through the world until I became a real sysadmin. So
Yep. Yep. Sounds like very similar in the fact that we just kind of both were good at it, right?
yep,
You know, I feel like with that very first summer job where I, like was, one of the 3 IT helpers for that summer, just kind of fell into it, right place, right time. But, if I look at it holistically, I kind of feel like you could almost call that path almost like a paid internship type of thing, because that's ultimately what allowed me to, after I graduated, become the full-time IT technician for a year or 2. Um, which leads me to my next point in this particular area is I kind of wanted to step back and do a little bit of a thought experiment here. These paths, if you took IT, and the tech industry as it was today, would these same paths still be viable for someone trying to get into the space? And my gut says yes, but I think it would be a little bit more difficult. I'm not sure there would be as much budget because I think a lot of organizations are going to use AI to try and address some of those very basic support needs. So my gut says it would be a little bit more difficult and maybe our paths would not have been as easy. But curious on your take as well, my friend.
I need to acknowledge the sheer luck of a lot of things that got me to where I am,
Yeah, same.
but also there's a thing that therapists will do, like, if you ever play the what if game, you have to play it both ways, which can mean
True.
a lot of situations, but let's go with the what if that, yes, luck kinda guided me in a lot of ways through, but if I had not been lucky in one place, then it's not like I would've just, "Well, I guess I'm not going anywhere," and then laid down and died, right? I
Right.
would've done something, so it's
Yeah.
still it's always hard to put it all back together and say, "Well, I see now the path that got me to where I am, but I don't clearly see the paths I would have taken otherwise." So, some of it was making, like, the job I was telling you with the imaging system, I was not qualified to do that job. I really wasn't. And I just kinda, I don't I didn't lie at my interview exactly, but I figured out
Maybe
how to do turns of
maybe
phrases to make it sound.
embellished a little bit, right?
Yeah, yeah, but then when I got in there, it turned out like it really didn't matter. It was fine. It turned out not to be a big deal. So, and we still have that problem today, is like a lot of times the interview that you go through isn't the interview that is applicable to the
Right.
job that you're getting.
Right.
And this was a small company too. It's not like I was dealing with some sort of major corporate thing where HR didn't know. It wasn't like that. I was interviewing with the people that were going to be my peers at that company, and they still didn't like. So that's a problem that persists. And so there's still that same thing you're going to hear from everybody, is like, even if you know you're not qualified for the job, go to, apply, go to job. If
Yeah.
it's interests you, apply, go anyway, try, do your best. And then if you don't get in, well, I mean, especially if you're unemployed, like, what did you lose, you know? So,
Right.
there is that, and then the other part of it was simply that I did what I could on the side, even because you were talking earlier about the curiosity thing. People who get into this industry that aren't curious and are literally only there for the paycheck, at some point, they're gonna hit a brick wall because
Yeah.
you gotta do more
Yep.
than just what your employer is willing to pay you to do, or you're gonna run out of runway, basically.
Yeah.
So, I was always doing nerdy, weird stuff on the side, and I was able to talk intelligently about things I didn't do. So, even though I'd like, yeah, I don't wanna sugarcoat this too much because I was an arrogant little dude, just like a lot of smart guys in their 20s are, is really full of myself, and, so I acted like I knew more than I did because I wasn't yet smart enough to realize I didn't know that much, right? But still, there's still some of, you just kinda gotta, I could there's only so much you can fake, I guess, right?
Yeah.
That if I had just been arrogant, but had literally no idea what I was talking about, people would have caught on real fast, and I would not have gotten very far either. So, even though, yeah, I was kinda tooting my own horn a lot, there was also the whole thing of, like, I was able to carry the conversation with people who knew what they were talking about. So,
Right.
that came from doing more than was strictly necessary to get my job done.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I
that can still carry you through all kinds of things today. So it's hard to answer your question. I love the question though. It's always, well, do you need this? Do you need that? Or is it still possible today like it was back then? And still acknowledging a lot of the lucky breaks that I got, also
yeah.
saying that, well, I had to force my way through too. They didn't just open the doors and let me in because of whatever. And so there's always going to be that. So when you say,
Yeah.
is it that easy? It's like, well, was it really that easy the first time? Because there's a whole thing of historians warn about this, of reading things that happened and then thinking, well, they're inevitable because they happened. Well, those things were not inevitable. It
Right.
wasn't, none of the things that happened to me were absolutely inevitable
Right.
or could happen to anyone else out there.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I mean, same here. I have to acknowledge that, like I said, that initial part-time summer job, right place, right time. Um, and I kind of pushed through that summer internship as well too. And I think one of the differences between myself and the others that were hired to help that summer was, I think one of my innate skills I've always had is it's really easy for me personally to wrap my head around new architectures, new protocols. I catch on to new things fairly quickly. So when, the sysadmin at the time starts showing us Active Directory, AD just made sense to me. The high level, surface level stuff. User management, computer, AD join, all that stuff made sense to me. Like, oh, this is the centralized identity brain of the network, right? However I described it to myself back then. Same thing with DNS. I know a lot of people that DNS doesn't come easily to a lot of people because it can be very convoluted. But for me, it was just like, oh yeah, that just makes sense, so a lot of that stuff came easily. And I think because of that and that summer job I had, I I'm sure I annoyed the poor guy at times. 'Cause I'm like, hey, what about this? What about that thing? What about this thing over here? I would always ask questions and questions and questions. And I think ultimately that made it easier for me to pivot into it being my full-time thing after I graduated, right? So anyway, just interesting parallels between our two journeys there. So the next thing I wanted to get into is every sysadmin has that, how do I want to say it? Their very first, oh shit, I broke something moment, right? Every sysadmin goes through that. And I think it's important that every sysadmin go through that at least once. What I wanted to do is, we kind of talked about our early years, how we landed that first IT job. What is each of our very first, oh shit, I broke something moment? And I can speak to mine because it really rewired the way I look at data and risk in IT. It changed my entire outlook on IT. And so I'll tell the story here. So I don't, even to this day, I don't fully remember exactly what I did. But I was, you remember Kickstart scripts, Eric? Remember
Oh yeah.
Kicks?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I was editing a Kickstart script, and this was at that K through 12 school district I was talking about. And thankfully, it was during the summer. That will become relevant in a second. So, and for those that are not in the U.S., traditionally K through 12 schools in the U.S. do not have students attending in the summer months. So June, July, August, right? So no students around. Anyway, I'm editing this Kickstart script, and I'm running it on a workstation in one of the labs. And something's not working right, so I adjust something, and the script is mounting a network drive as a drive letter on the system. And like I said, I don't remember exactly what happened, but I ended up nuking an entire application share. Like, poof, gone. Student grade databases, district financial information, poof, gone. So I realize my mistake as I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh no. Oh no. I pick up the phone in the computer lab, and I call my boss, the sysadmin at the school, and I'm like, hey, can you go ahead and take a look at the application share? I hear some typing on the other side. It's gone. That's all I hear on the other side. It's gone. I'm like, I'll be down to the server room in 5 minutes, and I'll recover it because I had nuked it, right? And this is back in the days of tape, so I'm inserting tape drives, and I'm praying at the tape drive as it's chunking along, doing its thing, and thankfully I recovered it. Now, again, it was the summer, classes were not in session. That said, there were still administrative people trying to do their jobs, right? But that moment, oh no, it's gone, that moment was my first, oh my God, I broke something moment. And from then on, I tell you what, even to this day, if anything I'm doing even has the just minute possibility of touching data, you can be damn sure that I know exactly what is going to happen when I press that enter button. And there's not going to be one backup copy. There's going to be two backup copies of whatever data I'm touching. And I guess it's maybe ironic, maybe not, that I ultimately, at one point in time in my career, ended up working for a backup and recovery vendor. But that really cultivated my risk aversion. It cultivated a healthy risk aversion in my job as a sysadmin, and really helped me build a respect for the safety of data. And I've carried that through my entire career. And so, um, it was a painful experience, but it was a painful learning experience. So, and I kept my job. That's the important part. So, how about you, Eric? What do you got?
Well, many, many, many years out, I still cannot answer the question if I'm the luckiest guy in IT or the least lucky guy in IT. So I'll just tell you the story and y'all maybe discuss it. I don't know. My big one was, son, what are you doing? And it was tears streaming down my face. Well, Dad, I deleted all of your files and I'm trying to undelete them. Can you please leave the room while I undelete everything? And he did, and I didn't die, and that's awesome. And I have never done anything like that ever since. I still don't remember what I had done that actually caused this problem, but yeah, and you got to figure now, this is 20 meg C drive. Most of our stuff is on floppy disks.
Right?
This was not great. And even while it's working, it's taking a seriously long amount of time to do anything. So you just don't know. And yeah, I was terrified that that was my last day on Earth, and it wasn't. But it's for a long. I've been telling this particular joke for a long time, and people older than me get it, but people my age and younger a lot of times don't, because there's this really popular book and then movie, like 1970-ish or so, called Love Story, and the tagline for it is "Love means never having to say you're sorry," and for most of my career, my line has been backup means never having to say you're sorry. And just like in the love story thing, that line is not true at all in any way, shape, or form. You still need to apologize whether you screw up your personal relationships or your data. But let me tell you, having a backup around makes that sorry a lot less painful. And so I've known this from the day that I did not have a backup. And like, this is DOS 2.1 or whatever, 3. I don't know what version we have, but there's no internet. There's no yeah, learning how to undelete things was awesome as a terrified, 12, 13-year-old? I don't know. That was that was my moment, but I'm still here, y'all. Still here.
Oh man, I,
But
it's
I
funny.
cannot imagine out of all, and I've screwed up a lot of my career, just like anybody with a career as long as mine. I don't believe they can say they have, and I've made plenty of mistakes, but I do not have anything that sticks out as that moment that comes near that one.
But yeah, and I think what's funny here is that both of our moments have to do with data. And I get the feeling a lot of sysadmin's origin stories, or at least that first big mess up, has to do with the destruction of, or the inadvertent destruction of data. And it almost to me feels like a sysadmin rite of passage, right? Like every sysadmin has to do it at least once. And it's that aha learning moment, you know? And it's funny. I've asked this question of a lot of different admins over the years, and it's almost universal that that's the first big mess up. Those of you watching, I'd be curious what your first "oh my god, I broke something" moment was. I would love to hear it, really. And if we have enough of them, I'd love to cover a bunch of them on an episode of the show, just because I don't know. It's almost academic for me. Like almost every single one I've run into has to do with, oops, I deleted something, right? When you really get down to it. So anyway, um, yeah, that's interesting. Oh, anyway, I've spent some time throughout this episode talking about the first sysadmin I worked under, my very first mentor. I've had several mentors as I've gone throughout my career. Um, I've had a lot of people provide advice to me throughout my career, and almost all of it good. There's been some that's been a little questionable in retrospect, but almost all of it good. And I guess what I wanted to do is talk about some of the advice that we've had throughout our careers, Eric. Which of that advice has held up? What has not? And there are two positive pieces of advice that have stuck with me throughout my career. The first one was from my very first IT mentor. Again, the sysadmin that I worked under during that high school, that K through 12 education job I talked about. I remember him saying, like, Andy, and I've probably told the story on the show before, but he told me, Andy, the key to IT is laziness. And I remember, like, okay, that's weird. Key to IT is laziness. And I had him expand on why is the key to IT laziness. His whole point was, if you're going to do anything more than once, automate it. I mentioned Kickstart scripts. This and the fact that this guy was a big Debian, a big Unix guy. You can imagine how much shell scripting was going on in that environment. And that's where I developed like I said, my love for open source and Linux, and by proxy, shell scripting and automation. And and eventually that would carry me through to PowerShell and my ability to create automated scripts and to do things en masse. And so that was a very powerful lesson for me in that, like, oh, I don't have to do everything manually. I remember one of my very first tasks in that, and when I finally went full time, is like, hey, all 400 students that exist in AD, we need to make this one change for them. Well, this is before I had any scripting knowledge. And I still believe to this day, he had me do this as a learning experience, because I touched every single one of those 400 some students manually and made the same change on each one of those AD accounts. And you know what? I really appreciated it later on once I learned how to automate things. So it was a good learning experience. And the other piece of advice that I got much later in my career, during my managed service provider days, for those of you that have never worked for a managed service provider, the job never ends. And I mean, you could say that of any IT job. The job literally never ends, right? There's always something broken. There's always something that needs fixed. There's always some project to work on. I remember it was, I was starting to build our family. We had a newborn at home. My wife and I, we had an apartment we were living in. And I remember, like, that was one of the first times in my career where I was really starting to feel burnout, right? And I had a mentor at the time who told me, Andy, this job never ends. Literally, there's always something that needs to be done. You will never finish all of the work in a day. He's like, at some point, 5 o'clock, 4:30, 6 o'clock, whatever, at some point you have to say, the end. The end. That's it for the day. The end. And then pick it up fresh tomorrow. Now, again, if it's an outage or there's an emergency, you can't say the end, right? But generally speaking, day to day, to retain your sanity, to avoid that burnout, sometimes you have to say the end. And still, to this day, I'll be sitting there, it'll be almost end of day, I start feeling that fatigue in my brain, like, okay, I'm starting to reach my limit for the day. I still mentally tell myself the end, right? And that has stuck with me. Maybe not an IT sysadmin specific piece of advice, but a piece of advice that has stuck with me nonetheless. So before we get into the advice that does not stick, I'll pass things over to you, Eric. What advice have you gotten that has been good for you over the years?
Well, for better or worse, I never really had that one person I might say was my IT mentor. I had a
Yeah.
lot of people that I really respected. Most of them were not in my life or in my like reporting chain or anything long enough for me to go, yeah, this is. I have had a lot of people non IT. I had a business manager who was amazing. I've got a couple of people I could point to and say, yeah, they taught me a lot of really important things, but they weren't tech per se. It was
Right.
more like little things like, if you bring me a reasonably intelligent person who cares and has some curiosity and is just a decent human being, I can make them into a good technician. But if you bring me somebody who's just really raw smart, but is just kind of a jerk, I'm not going to be able to do a whole lot with them. They're
Right.
they're, they're just going to need to go. So it is important to be smart in this line of work, but it's more important to be a decent human being that other people can work with.
Right.
Um, some of the people that I have really enjoyed and learned a lot from throughout my career were not necessarily smarter than me. You know, um, some of them I
Right.
know they weren't, but they were just good people and easy to work with, and
Yeah.
they melded right in, and you get a synergistic effect out of that
Yeah.
that is
For
just
sure.
impossible to beat.
Yep.
And then so much of it comes down to treating your job like customer service, and that customer service is important. And I was telling you about how I learned to hate the public while answering phones. And yeah, as a young man, and it didn't do any favors for me that I still can't. If a phone rings today, I just want it to stop. Ugh. A lot of that really destroyed me. But at the same time, now that I've come back full circle, is like I've some of the best experience I've had. The tech and the problem may have been wildly difficult, but me coming in going, "Hey, you know what? I got you. It's going to be fine. We're going to figure this out. I understand you're frustrated by this. Let's get to work on it. Let's make it go." And I got through so much more like that than anything else. My brains didn't carry me through. So much of the stuff that you think is important is really not. It's really that ability to just work with people. And I
Right.
know some of us hate to hear that. Like I know you referenced the IT crowd. Was that last episode or the one before? And the vampire guy in the server room, and that's
Yep.
what era I thought I was heading. And I found out that's not really a viable. It's
Right.
not just not a thing. It's so important to be a decent human being and to
Yep.
listen and to mesh well with other people, and you learn more. And best thing I ever did was tell my ego, "Stuff it. Just go be quiet. Just go
Yep.
sit in the corner," and
Yep. Agreed. Agreed. I think a underrated skill is the ability to realize that um, you are not always the smartest person in the room as an underrated skill. And I think a skill that goes along with that is the ability to say, I don't know, and be okay with that answer.
be
And I
comfortable
think
with it.
you and I, Eric, are both, um, we're both of an age and we have the wisdom of careers behind us that we're able to say I don't know, but I think largely we need to normalize that it's okay to say I don't know across all facets of IT careers. Even
Yeah,
when you enter the industry, it's okay to say I don't know. It's impossible to know everything in this industry.
it is.
Impossible.
You're fighting against some enculturation too. I don't know what it's like in other cultures so much. I know in the
True.
United States,
True.
boys are expected to know things.
Yep.
You know, so from a young age, it's like you're expected to know things, and so a lot of the people that you're around is like, well, what stands out is like, well, my dad knows stuff, or that guy knows stuff, and that's who you emulate is the people who know stuff. And so there's this huge. It's just
Yeah.
how you're brought up.
True.
So to admit that you don't know something, and even more so to admit that you are wrong, are things that are very much
Yep.
beaten out of us as children. You don't do that. That's the bad thing, and it takes not so much even maturity, but just experience of going, "Oh, I didn't know that. Thank you for oh, wow, that's cool. That's good knowledge." That's one
Yep.
skill. You have to practice,
Yep.
right? And the other one is, "Oh, yeah, I really screwed that up. Let's get to making this right. I messed up. I did that. That's my fault. Don't sit around and come up with excuses or this and that and the other. I was wrong. Let's make it right. Let me make it right, or let me work with you to make whatever. Let's make it. That's the point. We got to get the train back on the tracks,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Um, takes practice, and you never. At least I will tell you, I never got used to it. But my life changed the day when I finally decided if I'm wrong, I'm just going to eat it and just go.
Yeah. Makes a
And
big
it sounds
difference.
like, oh, well, that's such an easy thing. Like, don't we do that all the time? Like, you'd be surprised at how much we, as at least Americans, I don't know about anybody else, but American men are just have this whole thing of, well, you can't admit you screwed up. You can't do that. That's death. But it's never ever been a problem for me. Never once.
Same.
Right.
Same.
But you don't get that until you do it. There's no telling you, there's no maturity that gets you there. There's people older
Right.
than me that I've had to suffer with. You're just like, well, they're never wrong. It's always somebody else's fault, whatever it is. And they've always got to, and they'll spend all this energy changing history and gaslighting you into how that wasn't their fault. Like, what takes a whole lot less energy and is easier and nobody ever gets mad at you about? It's like, oops, I messed that up. Let's make it right. And
Yep.
stay focused on the making it right part. And like, if you want to yell at me later, we got to make it right first. But I did that. Sorry. Let's go. Let's go.
Yep.
Let's put it back on track
Makes things
and
a lot
practice that,
easier.
folks. I mean, it's just your life is so much easier with it.
Oh
Not
yeah.
that you're ever going to go, oh, gee, I'm so happy when I mess up. It's no, it still hurts. It's still unpleasant feeling, but I'll sit with discomfort a little bit, get over it.
Yeah. Very
Don't
true.
make it worse by trying to gaslight somebody and that didn't happen or
Yeah.
lying or whatever. So
Very true. That's good advice. The one thing to finish up this section here is the advice that did not pan out, that ultimately ended up being bad advice. And I have to admit, I'm fortunate in that when I started thinking about this, like, hey, what advice did I get that hasn't panned out? I struggled a little bit to find some advice that didn't pan out. And what I came up with is that I think all of the bad advice I have gotten throughout my career is usually been architecture related. I remember several cases of older, more senior admins saying, you always configure it this way. Always. Never question it. Always. There's been multiple cases of that with multiple different technologies. And this ties back a little bit to some of the stuff that we've talked about in previous episodes, Eric, is that like, okay, the best architecture today may not be the best architecture tomorrow. Or um, the the conversation we had that also kind of makes me think along these same lines is like those people that want to massively oversize the workload for whatever's running on it today. Like, oh yeah, we need 64 gigs of memory and 12 processor cores. And okay, can you make the case that the workload actually demands that? You know,
mhm.
um, it makes me think of that as well too, and that's that advice I've had around, well, you just architect it this way. That's just the way it is. That's the advice in my career that has not lasted. Maybe it was right at the time, but it wasn't always right. And I guess that was another skill that I have cultivated and would uh, urge those newer to the industry to cultivate as well. Question your deployments, right? Question your infrastructure. Maybe it's right today and that's great, but maybe 3 months from now it's not. Maybe 6 months from now it's not. Maybe 2 years from now it's not, right? Always be questioning whether things are architected the correct way, configured the correct way. At least have that open mind, I guess, is the TLDR there, right? I don't know if there's anything you want to add before we start wrapping this thing up, Eric.
A very famous piece of advice that's absolutely bonkers is nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. Remember that one? Are you around long enough to have
Oh
heard
yeah,
that?
I remember. Yep, yep,
Which really leads right into everything else you just said is like, we're doing this because we've always done it and nobody ever got in trouble for it. Like, maybe people should be getting in trouble for it.
yep.
That was what I always came to. And there's this whole long thing that I'm afraid is going to wind up as in quotes on my tombstone is no one is in charge. And it comes back to everybody's following someone else, no matter who it is.
Yep.
There's always
Yep.
somebody else. And there's nobody that the buck actually stops at. And it's so much in IT, like, especially like you go out to, I don't even know what people do these days, but I know there are a lot of message board forums and you go out there and people would sound so authoritative and so smart and so everything. And you spend about 3 minutes really looking at it, and these people had no idea what they were talking about. And I will tell you the thing that I would say to most folks getting into this, if somebody throws some advice at you and it includes the words always or never,
Red
hit the
flag.
brakes, hit the brakes, take a good solid look. Because those are two words that should instantly tell you the sniff test is already starting to fail.
Yeah.
Now there are some always and there are some never things that are true, so you can't just blanket discard them, but that's the first place to pause is always this, always that.
Yeah.
Things that and people will again gaslight the snot out of you like, well, this is a best practice. who determined that best practice and who made that person authoritative?
Yeah.
Dig into that, get these sources, find it out, run it back. Because I've seen a lot of these things, and there's cases of one person on the internet read something by somebody else on the internet, and then it went back and they turn into these circular things. There's no ultimate beginning of some of this stuff, and it's just like this accepted best practice. And like, okay, show it to me though. Make me believe it. Don't just
Right.
tell me. And again, I say this all the time. I'm a Missouri boy. You got to show me, but I think everybody should be a show me person.
Yeah.
If you want to kill it in IT, especially, is like you have to show me because I'm not going to just take your word for it. If I don't recognize you as an authority, I'm not going to just take your word for it. And if I do recognize you as an authority, it's probably because I know enough about you that I can kind of bring in, well, this is something this person has said that tracks with the kind of way they do
Right.
things, or sometimes like, no, something's off. I'm going to challenge you on that. I want to hear, where did you get that? What is your
Yep.
source? What is your information? What experience leads you to this? Sell it to me, convince me.
Yep.
And I always be this way.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yep.
you just have to short circuit, I guess, and just fine, whatever, we'll do it this way. But at least be prepared if you to the don't get fired, but at least be prepared
Right.
to, are we sure? Have you thought that all the way through? Do you really know this, or is it just something that you do to short circuit and get past to the end?
Right. That's good advice. Very good advice. So, any advice that you've come across besides that didn't hold up long term?
Yeah, mostly just the kind of things you read on the internet. Just because somebody sounds like they know what they're talking about doesn't mean that they do.
Yeah.
So always, bring your brain to it. Don't have your, what is it? Don't have your mind so open that your brains fall out. But always bring your brain to bear to everything that you hear. I mean, if you're going into this line of work and you expect to succeed, you've got to at least have some critical thinking skills where you
Oh
can
yeah.
analyze and kind of poke back. And yeah,
Makes
I
sense.
feel a little bad for people coming after me because it's something that I'm going to need to have some separate deal where I can really flesh this concept out. But I remember a time when you would take an exam about flashing a system, right?
Yep.
And what they literally meant was you would carry around a little pocket UV light,
Yep.
and you would flash it onto the chip, and that would erase it, and then you would have to go in and reprogram it. So flashing used to be a very literal thing.
Right.
Um, all the chips on the motherboard do something, all of them.
Yep.
And like there was a time when we had to know these things and we had to know how to pull a chip off and replace it. And so much of that is gone. And like really getting down into how bits and bytes move has made me a better admin in so many ways. And like
Yeah.
trying to compact it into to this episode format is just not going to work out. But I feel a little bad that you no longer need to know that kind of stuff to get started, which can then have you forming concepts in your head that are wrong, and then
Right.
you carry those wrong concepts for 10 years, and then one day something comes up that contradicts that middle mental model that you built, and you can't
Right.
reconcile it.
Right.
But you also didn't have what I have, where I had to know how those things worked. So I got to bypass some of the things that now other admins are gonna face.
I think it was you and I. We did an episode specifically about abstraction and the pros and cons that it's imposed on the industry. I'll have to link that episode in the show notes because very applicable to what you just talked about. So, well, to wrap up this episode, Eric, I have one last thought experiment for us. So,
Alright.
knowing the trajectory that we both have taken, right? Kind of the tinkering in our younger years, the first jobs we got, um, the thought experiment I want to put on here is in 2026, would that same path, the we were curious in, tinkering with tech in our young years, does that path still exist in 2026? And I say that through the lens of cloud services taking over a lot of IT. And I ask that through the lens of the current hardware market and how expensive memory is, how a lot of people are being priced out of the local hardware market. Does the path you and I took to get into our initial IT jobs, does that still exist today, do you think?
I'd say conclusively it does not,
Yeah.
which I don't think is bad. I don't think it's bad. You also have to understand that when I came onto the scene, there was sort of an expectation of people, say 10 years older than me, that they knew punch card based systems. I never even saw a punch card based system in production.
Yeah.
Right. So it's
Right.
okay. It's okay that you can't do what I did. That's fine. That's not going to be what stops you.
Right.
And I also think you're going to have to be a little bit more creative. That hopefully the pricing stuff passes and we can get back into at least affordable systems. I don't think
Right.
it's long term manageable for the world to not be able to buy personal computers.
Right.
I know that I've read from people like, "Oh, someday we're gonna have the personal your personal computers in the cloud," and like, "What, you're gonna give me a Wise terminal to carry around in my pocket?" I don't like that.
Right.
And I don't think I'm alone on that. Like, no, there's so many problems with that. So
Yeah.
I think,
Same.
yeah, a lot of people are pipe dreaming that, but
Right.
I don't know. Your path will be different than mine and Andy's, 100%
Yep.
chance of that.
Agreed.
I don't think that's gonna be a big problem. I think, again, that curiosity, find different ways. Like maybe you have to get used equipment from a government surplus site. I didn't have that ability. I could not have done that. I had to buy new hardware or know somebody, or there are certain things. Well, now you can buy right from surplus sites. You can buy eBay. Goodwill for a while. I don't know if they still do this. I know that there used for a while, there's a Goodwill reboot where people would just take their computers in and then they would have a section of Goodwill that sold those back out. I don't
Yeah.
believe that subset still exists, but you can still get computers at thrift stores sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, a little bit of investigation, you can come up with an affordable machine. We were talking about advice a little bit. Sometimes you'll hear people like, well, if you're going to get into sysadmin, you have to have commercial equipment. No,
No.
that is the
No.
biggest pile of crap I've ever heard in my life.
Agreed.
Will it be easier for you to go into a Dell shop using, R760s or whatever if you have used an R760? Absolutely. But if you can take a basic x64 machine and identify all the components in it, know what they do, know how they all work, that's more transferable than having specific knowledge on a Dell
Yep.
R760 because you can
Agreed.
take that to HPE, Supermicro, I don't even know, Lenovo. All of them are built effectively the same way
Yep.
with their own little branding and their own little things, but they're all doing the same stuff, right?
Yep.
So don't get all hung up on, well, it's got to be commercial grade rack, blah, blah. Get what you can buy, get what you can afford. Start there.
Yep.
And later on, if you get these opportunities, yeah, don't pass them up, but don't be like, well, if I can't get an R760, I'm just done for. Mm-mm, that's
No.
absolutely not true.
Yep.
So
That's
it's basically like if you want it, you can find a way. I think
yep.
is because that's how I got into it. I wanted in and I got in, but I
Same.
pushed it. I didn't let up.
Yep. Same. Same. And I mean, there's stuff available today that you and I didn't have. Virtualization, for example. I mean, that solves a lot of um the need. You know how you in order to really understand a on-premises network, you have to have all the different components, DC,
Right?
file server, SQL box, whatever, you
Yeah.
know. It
And
used
now
to
you
be
can
we
get all
needed
of those things on your laptop today.
exactly. Yep. Exactly. So there's some of those benefits as well too. But other than that, my advice was going to be exactly the same as yours. So you put it perfectly. Um so yeah, I think we're wrapped on that one. So Eric, want to thank you as always for coming and sharing your expertise and your thoughts. Good talking to you as always, my friend. Good talk today, I think.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope this was good for people because this is my passion too. Is I want to retire, and I want to leave the world better than I found it. And I believe the way I do that is by making sure there will be people after me who are at least as good as I am.
Yep.
Better would be helpful, right? But
Yep.
I don't want y'all to be worse, and I don't want
Yep.
it to be because somebody like me wasn't around to say, "Hey, you know what?"
Yep. That's it's a good goal. Noble goal, my friend, for sure. I'm right there with you. So well, those of you watching, thank you for spending some time with us today. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Again, curious for your thoughts on everything we talked about today. So again, be sure to use those comment forms if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify. I will also have the episode thread going out on the GitHub discussion boards. And you can always email the show at contact@sysadminweekly.com as well, too. So again, would love to hear your thoughts and feedback on the stuff we've talked about today. With that, we'll let you get back to your week. Stay safe out there, and we'll catch you again next week for a future episode of SysAdmin Weekly. Have a good one.